Hello everybody, this is Elfire with the game Grey Goo. Now, I am a Goo main who's been playing since pretty close to release. I took a very long break from the game, came back to a small community of players who are really committed to the game, really love it, but I noticed that there aren't that many Goo players. Now, I just think that this is because it's kind of a weird faction or race, harder to get into. So this video is meant for the newer players who don't have much experience with this game in general. So, let's see, what can we start off with here? This is your Mother Goo. This is exactly what the game looks like when you crack it open. And you start with one scout and a mom. This is the drover. It is the anti-infantry for the Goo. You spawn with one because every race kind of spawns with their weakest unit as a scout. On this map it is cross spawn, so the other players over here, and they're helping us get set up right now. Well, we spawn here. So this is the health bar of the Mother Goo. 120 out of 1200 is what you start with. Now, players that aren't Goo can collect resources from anywhere in this blue area. To enable it, it is Control Z to see where you can get these resource piles from. Now, I always have this on, just as default, but you don't really need it as Goo. I just find it helpful for when I'm harassing the enemy team. So what you want to do with your mom is select her and send her down to these, what they call spigots, to collect these resources. Now you'll see now that I've stepped on it, I've got an orange bar, and this is the mom processing the resources, and you can move around while she's doing so. And you'll see here, we're on a mod called Quick Script, which is what all of the newer and more competitive players play on, which allows you to spawn a free mother once you've hit that full first bar. It basically gives all races a quick jump in economy, so that way there's not that really boring couple first minutes of the game that drew a lot of players away. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this mother over here, so we can just focus on this one for now. So, the moms can actually collect resources from spigots, and then move away and continue to process it. Now this bar is smaller, but it's actually the same amount of health that you're gaining. By the way, this is your health bar. So this full bar is equal to one little bar. Now you can take the resources, you'll see the orange is still processing, and I picked more up over here. Now once you've done one full process from a spigot, it'll spawn again. So you can actually go between the two spigots and just kind of slowly build up this resource so you can move to like another spigot farther away without having to lose too much mining time. Right? Now, once you have one full bar, you can do two things with it. You can make a small protein, or you can research a tech upgrade. I'm going to start off with just the small proteins here. So, there's two ways to do this. You could just push it, and it'll spawn, but you press V to set a rally point to wherever I'm trying to go. Like if I'm fighting over here, right, if I just press Q, the small protein will just spawn like right below the mother or right next to it somewhere. So what I want to do is I want to send my small protein where my little army is, so they immediately go straight there. Okay? Now, the Goo, the moms and the proteins can go up and down cliffs, which is very helpful. So let's take a look here. I'm going to set this mob here so it keeps collecting while we talk about these. Now, these are the drovers. Like I said, they're the primary anti-infantry for the Goo. They have a little cone attack, which does splash damage. So it attacks in a cone, anything within the cone takes the damage, instead of most other units, which are all single target. This is the Striders. It's an anti-armor unit. It has a little bit of armor piercing. I'll just spawn one to show you. So you get 2 from a small protein, and you can actually go down here in the left corner and hover for information on the units, no matter what unit it is. And right here. So it has armor penetration of 3. Now that essentially ignores 3 armor. The Drover does not, but as it says there, it has a range and an AoE of 200. The range of the Strider is 320. Now, the Drover has a speed of 145 and 125, which might not seem like much, but let's line them up here and send them over. As you can see, it pretty quickly catches up, just a small speed of 20. So you want to keep that in mind when you're deciding what units to build here. So I'm going to spawn a couple more smalls. And you can also set a rally point for your smalls. So like, if I have a bunch of small proteins set up over here, and when they spawn, I want them to go over here, I can spawn a unit, and it'll immediately start walking in that direction. I see very few Goo players actually doing this, so it's very important that you keep that in mind. Because when you spawn a unit, as you can see, it spawns with half health, and then slowly regenerates over time. One of the benefits to the Goo units is that when they take damage, their units actually heal over time. So it's better to take short trades with small exchanges instead of hard committing into major fights. Because if you can get a small advantageous trade for units, and your units are all like half health, you run away, heal up, and go back in, right? So let's take a look here. Now, for the other units you can get with a small protein is a Radiant. They see over cliffs and a little bit into bushes, which I can show you later. So we see there's a bunch of little tridents over here. And the other one is a Tempest. Now, Tempests are considered the best anti-air in the game because, for no reason, they have an AoE attack. And it's very difficult to micro air units in this game. Micro is in move around efficiently to avoid certain things, right? Now, their damage isn't huge, but they can actually hold multiple bullets here. So you see all these orbs? They each hold 3 bullets. So the majority of the time, you just spawn 4 Tempests in total, and they can actually almost destroy a whole squad of flying units. It's pretty ridiculous, honestly. And Tempests are also one of the few units that can climb over cliffs. So for example, I'll just send them over here. If you were worried about some air units trying to fly over like the corner of the map here, you can just sneak them on over here onto this cliff, and your opponent can't actually see these unless they get another flying unit to scout it out, or have like maybe a Radiant, right? Now, it is worth mentioning that the human and Betis air scouts can out-vision your own vision radius. So like there could be one like right here that I can't see, but your opponents can see the Tempest, so they can just have these tridents walk over and shoot the Tempest, and then they can kind of creep up with their air scout, no problem. I believe that covers that. So I'm going to show you something really important to note about the Drovers here. So they move and attack essentially like a tank, okay? Now what I mean by that is while you're clicking around, they'll still turn their head and keep shooting, right? Now their attack range is very short, so you have to get pretty close to the enemy units, but we can take advantage of this, okay? So I'm going to go up here. There should be a couple of tridents waiting for us. Now, I'm going to, let's see, where are they? There they are. Alright, so you see 3 grouped up tridents here. So what I'm going to do is actually not right-click on the unit, because the drovers will stop at maximum range. So it will keep these 2 back drovers from moving up if these 2 or 3 are in front of them. And then it kind of makes it less of an efficient attack. So for example, you'll see these 2 get stuck, right? So it took them longer to move up. But you can actually step up and move around to make sure we hit the splash on the other 2 in the back. Now, this is the most efficient way to trade. The way I explained, not the way I demonstrated. the most efficient way to trade for the goo against smaller units like tridents. Alright, so we're going to spawn another small protein here. And we're going to get ourselves some drovers. Now see, they're half health, going to heal up pretty quickly. And I'm actually going to bring us over here. Now, a lot of the times you're getting against players, you'll see that the enemy has split up their forces to avoid taking some serious drover damage. So what we're going to do is put this one back. And I'm going to demonstrate for you, because if you remember, right-clicking on the unit for drovers was not efficient at all. So what we're going to do is actually click next to the trident to try and immediately start attacking, and then make sure they all focus by surrounding it and then clicking on it. And then we're going to move on to the next one. Uh-oh. Now, tridents are actually relatively efficient against drovers because they're such a low health unit, and tridents are rather beefy for a tier 1 unit, but that's fine. So now you have a general idea of how to micro or fight with drovers, which is all that matters. Alright, let's take a look here. Let's move on to a large protein. Now this requires 3 bars from the mother, as you can see here. It was at full, we spawned a large, so it took away 3 bars. Now, there are 5 different tier 2 units, we'll call them, in the Goo's arsenal. We have the Dwellers, which are actually mines, essentially. So what they'll do is they will, if you have them holding in place long enough, see how it says must remain stationary to arm right there? If you have them stay in place long enough, they'll set themselves into the ground, and after a second of a unit moving over it, it'll detonate and pretty nearly one-shot anything. It's very high damage, kind of high risk, high reward, because in a lot of games you'll find there's a lot of open space, so it's better to plant them like in a bush or in somewhere with like a narrow entryway, right? So that way we can kind of force the opponent to step onto these. Now, you don't see Dwellers in many games, honestly, because it's a very high commitment, right? Part of the benefit for Dwellers is the AoE attack, and you're giving up 12 drovers for that, which, honestly, Dwellers are more efficient than drovers, because once they detonate, they do give you 1 small protein. But they're not great in huge army fights because usually your opponent can actually kill the small protein before you can split it into units. Let's see. Then we have the Destructor, which is the most common tier 2 unit you'll see out of the Goo. I say this because usually the way that the Goo ends the game, once they're ahead, if they can't quite close it out in other ways, they'll just build a lot of Destructors and just kind of A-click into the enemy team. So Destructors are rather beefy. They're not that tanky compared to other tanks, but they do a lot of damage, which is what we really need out of the Goo forces here. And we have the Crescents, our artillery unit. It's a very unique artillery unit because, well, for a few reasons. One of them is because just like the Tempests, they can actually walk over cliffs, which you can take huge advantage of in some situations, and really surprise your opponent if they don't have like an air scout or anything to just see them coming. Now, their attacks are also very slow. What they do is they wallop a piece of Goo into the air, and then upon landing, it'll deal damage over time. So it gives your opponent a little bit of time to move their units out of the way of any damage. But when they do hit, it does deal a lot of damage over time. I think it's more damage than any of the other artillery units, but it's over time instead of instantaneous like the other ones. So I love the Crescents. Some Goo players don't like using them very much, but they're very good in like mass tier 1 armies, right? Because they don't have as much health as a lot of tier 2s might have. And then we have the Bastion, which is our super tank. Because if you'll notice, every other unit splits off into 2, but the Bastion splits off into 1 massive unit. Now the Bastion has high armor, high health, and forces all nearby enemies to attack it. Now, Bastions are extremely efficient in armies where you can have around 3 or more large Proteans, because it'll tank up a lot of the damage that your somewhat less tanky Destructors can take, right? So if you can have like 4 Destructors and a Bastion, your army is probably really powerful for the time of the game. Like mid-game, it's pretty insane. You should be building a Bastion in any late game scenario, in my opinion. Everything's situational, right? But it's pretty rare you don't want a Bastion in your army. At least one. Almost never two. And then there's the Siphon. This, frankly, is kind of a meme unit, because, well, it sounds excellent, right? Fires a beam at the target while the beam is active, heals all the ally units nearby over time. Now, the problem is the Siphon has to kind of focus its target, right? So, if you, are against a bunch of Tier 1 units, it'll kill a Tier 1 unit and then take a second to start charging up and shooting and healing again. Now, it does have an AoE attack, which is worth mentioning, but it doesn't do much damage. So, if you do get into a situation where you're going to play a Siphon, you're going to play it against, a Bastion, right? And, something big, tanky, so it can focus for a while, and you want more than one Siphon, because they can heal each other as well. The problem is these kind of take a pretty heavy commitment, where once upgraded, which we'll get in the upgrades in a moment, you almost always want the Destructors first. But, there are some situations and where a game once in a while where a Siphon is actually pretty awesome. And if you want to make your opponent tilt off the face of the earth, build a couple of these in your army, and they might FF sooner than they need to. Alright, now I've got 3 large Proteans here, so let's go ahead and see if I can demonstrate some of these for you. I'll start off with the Dwellers. So they look kind of funny when they're running around. When they spawn, they always look like that, which is kind of fun. But they take a second to set up, and then once they stop, they'll dig themselves into the ground like this. Now, when they're covered orange like this, it actually means that they're invisible. It also does the same when you step into a bush. I'll press Z to look at bushes, by the way. Worth mentioning. So you can kind of see green, right? So it's very easy to tell when they're on or off. Now, they do take a second, right, before they flip on. Which that might not seem like very long, but when you're in the middle of a game, it's pretty short period of time. Now, let's see. Their damage is pretty high because they have an armor penetration of 3, and the radius is very large. So it'll actually one-shot all of these tridents if they were to walk into one of these. These Dwellers can be really good in some situations, but lately in the current meta, games are really tight for Goo. So if you're expecting an opponent to harass you from a certain direction, like say I knew these Dwellers or these Tridents were coming, I could set a Dweller at this part or this bottom of the ramp to be prepared for it, and then they'll just walk into it, and then they'll just lose their whole army. Well, I gain a pretty huge benefit for what's essentially just half a bar for a mom, because if you remember, Dwellers die, they give you a small protein. So we can consider each Dweller to be worth 1.5 bars. So yeah, Dwellers are a pretty awesome unit. It always feels good when you hit them. It feels really bad when you don't hit with them, though, so keep that in mind. I highly recommend experimenting with them. Now, second, I'll go over the Destructors, because these are going to be your bread and butter for a mid to late game damage, right? These guys deal a whopping 33 damage with a pretty average rate of fire, but a really long range. Like your tier 1 here, range of 320, range of 375. Now they are very slow, so keep that in mind, but they have 3 armor, which is always nice, but a lot of things have 3 armor penetration. And 175 health really isn't that much when compared to a Strider. Like, for example, these guys don't have any armor, but they have 140 health. But these guys do a lot of damage. Let's see. Let's talk about the Crescents next. Now, the Crescents, one of my favorite units to build. Not always good because of how absolutely slow they are. Slowest unit I think we have, 85, yikes. Right? Because we can compare the Strider, which is a little bit slower than the Driver, or the Drover, and look how much faster it is. Very rarely will you need to do this, but it's more so if you're moving across the map with crescents. You can actually select multiple units, hold the C key and right click, and they'll all move as fast as the slowest unit, which in this case is the crescent. So you can set yourself up in a position where, like, I know my opponent's straight up here. I'll set my tanks up in the front, my artillery in the back, and I can I can hold C and click, and then they'll all move at the same speed as the crescents. Alright, let's go ahead and demonstrate what I mean by the crescent's attacks, because they're very odd, right? So I'm going to actually go over here and attack these tridents. You'll see the incredibly long range we got here with these attacks, and they deal damage over time. And it really drains in there. So the range is actually very long, the radius is very large, but the attacks are very slow. And it's worth mentioning that the Crescent's attacks can actually be shot down by anti-air like the Tempests. So you want to keep that in mind when you're choosing your tech upgrades, which we can go over in a moment here. But it's very important to know if you decide to go for Crescents, because your opponent can just build a few anti-airs and make them useless. Now, your options are to make a lot of Crescents, which isn't very efficient, or there's a couple of techs you can go for. And if you are newer to the game, it's worth mentioning you can hold the Alt key and right-click to make the Crescents shoot somewhere, right? And they'll keep shooting wherever you click until you tell them to do something else. So it's a really good way to hold choke points like this. Artillery does have a minimum range, which means you can't attack within this area here, as my cursor shows. So you want to keep all of this in mind when you're playing with the Crescent. Let's see. And we have the Bastion, everybody's favorite except for the betas. Now, let's see. We have one of the tankiest units in the game, 750 max health, 3 armor, not a lot. That's okay, because 750 is ridiculous. It's huge. And it heals itself. Remember, it can heal over time, right? So if you can get in there with a Bastion and get him out with like 100 health, after a little while you come back, he'll be at full again. You get so much value. It's insane. Now, one thing you want to know with more health units like this Bastion here is when you first spawn, it actually heals relatively quickly over a set period of time. But when it comes to when it comes to coming back and trying to heal back up, your units will heal slower than when they spawn, if that makes sense. So he healed very quickly from half health to 750. It'll take him a lot longer from that same amount of health to 750 if he gets back out. And yeah, we'll just bring him over here to demonstrate that taunt ability in a moment. And then we are also going to show you what a Siphon looks like. Another really weird looking one. Got little noodle arms. And yeah, nothing too exciting about this guy. He attacks pretty okay rate. Damage isn't very high when compared to something like this guy. 33 versus 7. Sure, the rate of fire is pretty high, but it's not really that much of a difference because you get 2 destructors, remember, for 1 Siphon. So the real weakness for the Siphon is that it's 1 whole small protein for 1 Siphon versus 2 Crescents, 2 Destructors, 2 Dwellers. The only thing that's really worth 1 is this Bastion here, because it is tanky. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like for these Radiants here to view inside of bushes, because each race has 1 unit that lets them see inside of bushes for like stealth, right? Because if the unit's hiding in the bush, you can't see it. I'm not going to see click here because the Radiants are the fastest unit, and I just want to get them up there as quickly as I can. There should be a Trident waiting up here for us. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and buy it so we can look at it in a second. Okay, so we're going to set the Bastion up first. There you go. And then we're going to send a Radiant up as well. Alright, so you see it's getting attacked. Alright, so we see the Trident here because of the Radiant. And the Trident has that exclamation because it can only attack the Bastion. No matter how many times my buddy here clicks, it will always hit the Bastion. Right? There you go. And then let's just show what it looks like when this guy's healing up. Pretty cool attack animation, if I do say so myself. And then, let's see. We're going to take a look at some of the tech upgrades here. Now, there are 5 different areas of tech you can go. They all cost the same thing. It's just one mother bar here for the tech upgrades. So I'm going to go through each one of these as quickly as I can, because I know this video is already pretty long. So, we have the Bastion Volatility upgrade. Lets them rampage after sustaining critical damage. While rampaging, they deal damage to all enemies and explode on death. Can't be healed or regenerated once it rampages. I don't see this happen very often, simply because you more frequently than not want to go for these other upgrades. But I find that this is especially effective against a tier 1 army. And let's take a look here. Next tech upgrade. We have this Goo Splash upgrade. So it makes our Destructors here do AoE attack damage. Now this was actually reduced splash damage before people stopped working on the game. Now, the splash damage isn't, well, it's rather efficient. It's very small. Like, the area is a lot smaller than you would think. It's not very well demonstrated when the Destructors attack. So, 9 times out of 10, you want to go for the Contagious Goo upgrade here, which is what almost every game, almost every Goo player goes, okay? This is the big one. The Destructor projectiles now bounce to nearby enemies up to 2 times. So this, our highest damage unit, now bounces to deal triple the damage, right? Because it hits 3 things instead of 1. Pretty huge. Especially if you can get like 6 of these, you pretty much destroy any tanky units very quickly. It's very, very oppressive. It's worth mentioning that each upgrade is the same amount of time as well, so 3 minutes, kind of long. So you want to keep that in the back of your head when you're trying to decide when to upgrade. Let's take a look. Crescent Symbiotic Pool, one of my favorite upgrades to go for. It makes the Crescents actually heal as well as damage whenever they're shooting. This is really good if you're going to surprise your opponent with some Crescent units. I've managed to pull out a win or 2 with that, but it's worth mentioning again that once your opponent gets some anti-air going, it counters everything you can possibly do with the Crescent. So it can be a little challenging. Oh, I should also mention, in each section, you can only have 1 upgrade. So you can't have the Rampaging Bastion and the Contagious Goo. So, well, this one is quite good. You'll see a lot of players choose to try and get the Projectile Endurance upgrade instead if it gets to be late game. It can't be shot down anymore, but its damage and radius is reduced. So you can go for this if you intend on sticking with Crescents later in the game. But keep in mind that it actually makes the projectile look different, so your opponent can know when you go for this upgrade. Excuse me. So a really experienced Grey Goo player will recognize that and be able to play around it. It'll look like a little spiky ball, for those who don't know. Let's see. Tempests can now use their shots as artillery. You can absolutely go for this. If you're playing against somebody who likes spamming air units for some reason, it's actually very worth going for this. Because one whole small protein for 2 Tempests is a very heavy commitment, right? So you have to worry about getting overrun by your opponent's smaller tier 1 units or maybe a couple tanks. But you can get this, and your investment in anti-air is much more valuable. So there are games where this is very, very good. Let's see. Tempest shots can be attached to a scout drone that reveals the map around the object for a duration. You almost never want to go for this because your Tempests deal enough damage where hopefully you're killing the unit, the air unit, right? And you probably already have a pretty good idea of what the air unit is trying to scout because they're probably trying to look at you, right? So it's not really worth it in my opinion. Maybe there is a time where you might go for it, but not really in my opinion. So, Tempest now also does damage over time. Excellent combo with the artillery. If you go for this, you want to go for this. Just because, you know, if you're going for this, you're against a lot of air units. This is insanely good against air units. Just another recommendation. And we have the aerial defense upgrade where the Radiants, these guys, can now target aircraft. You don't normally want this because your Radiants don't do much damage. Damage of 6, damage of 11. Yeah, there is a really fun build you can actually go where you combine that with Veiled Surveillance upgrade and they gain stealth. And you could just build nothing but these. Not very competitive, but very fun, I will say, from experience. Radiants can now detect stealth enemies. Ooh, worth mentioning. The only thing that can detect stealth is actually your proteins here. Your small proteins. And your mobs. That's it. So if you're offensive, going for something very offensive, and like say the beta goes for the invisible stalker upgrade, you have to have small protein with your army in order for that to, in order to see them. And your proteins have very limited stealth vision actually, so it's very hard to see any units because you see this radius, a lot shorter than it looks. Because these proteins might not be at the front of your army, and you don't want them at the front of your army without like a bastion, because if your opponent just destroys these, it's a lot of resources that just go to waste. Let's see. And then we have the Dwellers Cloaking upgrade. So the Dwellers are super fun mine units. Can actually remain stealthed while they're moving. So if your opponent doesn't have any anti-stealth, and you can surprise them with this, like you might surprise them with a Crescent healing upgrade, you can actually run these right into your opponent's army, and they'll detonate and almost destroy everything. Because, well, not one-shotting almost everything, because it's only 150 damage. 2 probably will. You just want to keep in mind that that radius isn't huge, so you want to get them as close as possible. And then once they do detonate, you have to immediately pull your small proteins out that they spawn, because those will probably die. What else do we have here? We have the 2 small proteins upgrade, which, again, another combo, right? If you decide to go for Dwellers a lot, getting 2 small proteins, such value. You literally get more than you're spending in small proteins, because it's 3, right? 3 mother bars to get 2 small proteins after the Dwellers go off. And then instead you get 4. So you get 4 small proteins for 3 small proteins, and you detonate and destroy your opponent's army. That's some stonks, right? I just labeled this video for a timestamp. Anyway, and then we have the Catalytic Residue upgrade. When they consume a unit or structure, they burst healing for nearby units. So, I didn't mention this before, but all of these blobs, right, actually deal damage. And when they kill something, they eat it up and they heal over time. That includes your mother for like resources, which we can get into later. So this makes it also heal all nearby allies. So there are situations where you might actually decide, hey, I need a large protein with my army to deal some serious damage. Because this rate of fire, 0.2, pretty fast, pretty heavy damage, because of the what am I trying to say? The damage and the rate of fire is very high, so it's very strong if you can manage to get the slow unit into something. The small proteins don't do as much damage, but they are rather fast. 130, pretty fast. These guys are only 75, but they deal a lot more damage. So there are situations where you need proteins in your army, like if they have stealth, you can get this, so you can actually get some value if your small protein kills something. Generally not really worth it, because your opponent's probably good enough to snipe these before they can kill anything. But good to know that this exists, because there are situations where you want to go for it. And then when any large protein or bastion unit dies, it leaves a small protein in its place. So the large protein probably shouldn't be dying, because right before it dies, you want to spawn something. Now, if you're not very confident in yourself to be able to move a large, very slow, large protein into the opponent's army, and last minute manage to get something out of it, like maybe spawn some half-health destructors, right? It might be worth going for this. If you know you're going to need a lot of bastions, right, then yeah, you can go for it. But like I said, you don't want too many bastions. Generally, you don't really need to build this. These are more like economic, get value out of your stuff in this section here. You'll notice each section has a theme. So we go general damage, artillery, anti-air, stealth, and economic upgrades. So now that we've gone over all these, finally, I'm actually going to move on and going to demonstrate for you what it looks like when you're actually playing the game. Finally, right? How long? So we're going to take our new mother here. I'm going to put her in the spawn, just so you can see what it looks like. Now, you spawn here, okay? You want to immediately decide where you're going to go. So on this map, there's only one really efficient path for Goo, and that's up here, and then across here. So I'm going to demonstrate immediately as soon as you start, go straight up here. And then you'll remember we didn't start with a full bar, so once this completes, you'll get a free mother spawn. So here's what I do on this map. I actually send my mother in this direction, and then once she has spawned a second mom, because I'm losing value for my second mom no matter which way I go, I'll actually split my army off. So I'll have a mom go up here and a mom go down here for some extra value. Now there's a couple ways you can do it. You can actually go back and then up, and then you can split them off here so you can go straight up and down here. But when you're going around with your mother Goo, you want her to go between two spigots. And you want to look for spigots with cliffs, like this little one here, or bushes. Very important, because the mom is actually rather defenseless and very vulnerable to enemy units. Now, your best friend, when you're playing Goo, is the D key, which is actually the patrol key. So they're very awkward with the way that these work. So I click and click after pushing D, and then I right-click, and it engages the command. One thing you want to keep in mind is this radius here is how far you have to go to collect anything. So notice I'm not quite on top of it. Well, that's a bad angle. But I'm not quite on top of it, and I can still collect it. So I can actually go like right before these little points here, and you'll see the mom's going to collect it, and then immediately turn around to be as efficient as you can, because when your mom is moving around the map, you want her to have this orange bar, so she's constantly refining any of the resources she's picked up so she can use it. Now, once you are able to, I highly recommend using our friend the V key, to rally where you want to spawn your mother. Now, I know a Spigot's going to spawn here, okay? I know a Spigot's going to spawn any second, and I have this orange bar. So, because I've already picked it up, and the new mom doesn't start with any resources, I'm going to set my rally to this Spigot, command my mom to go here, and spawn a new mom, and it'll select it, but she'll automatically begin moving down towards that other Spigot. And then I'm going to set up this patrol again, and make sure that this one is properly in place, as close to the bush as I can, so if somebody does show up, I can just click, and then immediately hide them off. Right? So these are just some of the simple tips for playing as Goo with a mom. But very crucial that you learn these first. Alright, let's take a look here. So, when you are with a mom, and let's say I see some guys running from this direction, coming towards my mom, I gotta get her out of there, right? So, this cliff sucks, but this bush is really good. This cliff sucks because if one air unit comes by, she's pretty much dead. But this bush is really good. So, you see this radius? Units will take damage in that radius if they step into it, but she's not revealed because the center of her unit is still within the bush. So what you can do is with like little points like this, set yourself up right here, and then once a unit gets right about the outside of your range, set yourself up to right outside the bush so she moves up and eats as many bulked up units as they can, because you'll notice a lot of the times units will clump up while you're moving around. So it's very efficient to do so that way. And if your mom does kill anything, she actually gains unrefined resources from it. The orange bar, as they call it. So those are, that's a very important detail to keep in mind. Now, let's see. Excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and set this up here with some large proteins. I want to get some units together just to show you what it looks like when there's a few things going on, and I'm actually going to move up and try to show what it looks like when you try to harass another player. So this next part of the video is really only relevant against human and beta, but arguably they are much more difficult for the Goo to deal with than other races. So I'm gonna move us up here, and I should run into an extractor. Alright, I forgot I put these here. I'm just going to A-click even though it's inefficient, so you can kind of see what it looks like when the units are fighting. I'm going to try to position the Siphon here as close as I can to everything, while this Bastion is tanking everything. You see how it keeps changing targets like that? Kind of inefficient. It's trying to heal, but it just can't. Very sad. We spotted one in the bush here. That's why Radiants are awesome. Alright, so now we've taken a look here. We have an Extractor, and if you move up here, you'll see the human base. So a worker will go from this refinery to this extractor and back. Now, the worker, each worker is worth about 250 resources is what they call it. Now, it's harder for us as Goo to be able to quantify how many resources we have, but by and large, Goo needs more resources than any of the other race to do any little thing. Little exaggerated, but that's what you have to keep in mind. We have to be very efficient with our units because they can heal up and they have lower health. So these workers will spawn, and you'll see them come out and then back to the extractor. Now, when a worker gets to the extractor and comes back out, when it leaves, it'll be at full health again. So if you get it to like half health on its way over, it'll heal up and leave. Now this this extractor here, you can just go ahead and try to kill it with like a Strider or some Destructors, because the human ones have 3 armor like we see here, but the beta ones don't actually have any armor. So occasionally it is efficient, even though some would suggest not as efficient, to try and destroy it with a drover. Or a group of drovers. Now, when a worker does come back from the extractor, it's carrying some resources. And when these resources get destroyed, I guess, they detonate. So it'll actually one-shot any drovers that are next to the worker. And now remember, these drovers have very low range. Where did the small protein go? Let's go. Drovers have very small range, which is just barely out of range to not get hit by the detonation. So it requires some very fancy clicking to actually avoid getting detonated themselves. So you can click, remember, you don't want to click on the worker, because if you have 8 or more, they'll actually push each other into it and the front ones will die. You want to click next to it, so that way they are just barely out of range and just barely in range to shoot it. So I believe that concludes everything I wanted to talk to you guys about. In the future, I intend on doing some build guides, for example, just to show people how to play as or against the goo. But for now, I think this will do it. And I appreciate all of your guys' time. If you haven't, you should check out the Grey Goo Discord, which is kind of hard to find a link. But if you're able to go to the Reddit, I think there is a pinned post with the Discord link. So go to the Grey Goo subreddit and check out the Discord. Let us know if you found the community through this video, which is probably the other way around, but that's alright. And if you have any questions, feel free to direct message me on the Discord. You'll see my username as Elfire. And yeah, I appreciate everybody's time, and looking forward to making more content with you guys. Hello. So, after starting to upload the video, I realized I totally forgot to talk about the Goo's epic unit, the Purger. So, as smooth as that was, I'm going to open up the extras and go to the encyclopedia, and just go on down and select the Purger here. So, this unit is what happens when you get to a full 4 bars on a mother, and then you start producing it. Now it'll have a massive health pool that starts out very low. You can right click some proteins or moms into it, and the more health the unit has, the faster it will charge up your epic unit, basically. Now when you do start making the epic unit, it has to be on a spigot, and it'll start slowly gaining health. And then when it's at full health, your Purger is complete. Now the Purger, one of the strongest units in the game, I believe second strongest only to the Dirge, which is the Shroud's epic unit. It has an incredibly long range, like actually insane, and its area of effect massive, and its damage huge with really high armor penetration. Now it does have a minimum range, which is kind of weak, but it also has a melee attack, like the Mother Goo. So if the unit walks into it, you still deal damage to it. So if you accompany this with actually some siphons or healing crescents, there's very little chance your opponent's going to beat it, unless they have their own epic unit. In fact, I don't think with proper play that your opponent will win if you finish the Purger. Keep in mind, the Purger takes 10 minutes to complete without any assistance. So it's a really heavy commitment, because you're losing a spigot your mother could be on, and a mother with 4 bars, full bars. Not to mention that the mother could be pumping units out while this thing is being made. So this is a very heavy endgame unit. If you go for completion, make sure you have some large proteins to support it. Like I said, siphon, crescent, some destructors, etc. But other than that, thank you for your time, and enjoy the game.